All right, so we've talked about the dominant, creative, normalizing ESFJ. Let's talk about the harmonizing ESFJ. What does this subtype look like?
Okay, so the harmonizing subtype is more empathic. It's more reflective. It's when I said normalizing is more chill vibe, this is the super chill vibe ESFJ for the most part. These are very deeply caring feelers. And this is true for all harmonizing subtypes, but particularly for the ones who lead with a feeling function. These are the super empathic version of the type. They also have a tendency to bring some sophistication to things. So it is common for the harmonizing subtype to be an experience or wiring that happens later in life. It's most commonly found in people over the age of 40. That doesn't mean you can't be a harmonizing ESFJ that's younger, but as a general rule, we grow into this later on in life. So there's a tendency for this subtype to have a sophistication that comes along with age, wisdom, seasoning, but not always. That's not always the case. They're a more behind the scenes style. So if the dominant, in Linda Barron's vernacular, if the dominant is in charge, the creative is a get things going. The normalizing would be a behind the scenes. The normalizing is more of the chart the course style. And then the harmonizing would be behind the scenes. And they also, they have the sophistication comes from a complex neural wiring that's called a diamond-shaped pattern that connects multiple different parts of the brain together in almost like a zigzag. And for ESFJs, they create these networks of all of these diverse brain regions that work together in harmony that allows them to connect the dots of a whole bunch of different things that might not be directly communicated with. And so they have a relatively intuitive style, particularly when they're dealing one-on-one with other people. They're really good listeners. And so all the ESFJs have a capacity to tap into it. Maybe the dominant subtype, they're still good at listening, but they're tracking and listening for a certain thing.
Yeah.
Like, what is the needs of the room? How do I respond to those quickly? This is not scanning and listening for specific things. This is like a general openness to listening and receiving lots of information. And when they do that, they're not just scanning for needs, they're also looking for factual details. So this is also a connection to a more thinking part of the brain as well. So they're a little connected, a little more in touch with the intuitive and the thinking part of who they are. But that comes at a cost, right? That capacity to be more in touch with intuition and that thinking style. And the cost is that they have the weakest halo of all the ESFJs. In fact, sometimes it's missing.
Yeah.
And that halo is the expectations of society. So these are the ESFJs that are kind of quirky and weird.
Halo is referencing the EEG brain scans.
Right. Like
the
I
halo
mentioned.
pattern.
That's
Yeah.
right. Well, like I mentioned before, it's that connection around, I thought I mentioned it earlier, but I could be wrong. But it's
I'm just saying in case somebody sees this one little piece right here, doesn't see the whole episode.
Right, of course, because these get chopped up into 10-minute bits. So the halo is the ring around the mind or brain that indicates a person is tapped into and understands and responds to social expectations.
Yeah.
And most ESFJs are really good at it. But the harmonizing ESFJ, particularly if they're older, maybe they just got to that place where they don't care that much anymore. And so they're just not attending to it. And so they tend to be a little bit more of, Daria calls them a bit of odd birds with unusual habits and quirks. And so this ESFJ is not going to be as stereotypical. In fact, they might see themselves as introverts. They might see themselves as intuitives. I wouldn't be surprised if these ESFJs mistype as INFJs a lot.
Yeah, or maybe INFPs or even ISFJs. Introvert and intuitive, I think, would probably be the mistypes.
Exactly. Particularly since harmonizing subtypes are one-to-one styles. And so they really prefer things to be one-to-one or smaller groups as a general rule. And when they take on these roles, because of course we're talking about careers, and so they find themselves in roles where they work one-to-one with people, they're really tuned into reading that person, adapting to them, understanding a deeper component. But oftentimes this is in positions of counseling, right, or helping the person out. And unlike other types that might try to assist that person with new ways of, new perspectives or new ways of thinking about things, these ESFJs are looking for a practical application. They're really tuned into figuring out what the other person needs and then giving them practical steps to implement so that they have real, quicker real world results. It's not just a reframe. It's actually, this is what you do in order to improve your circumstances. And they're comfortable using, Dario says, complex conceptual models, at least in their specialty. So again, tapped into an intuitive aspect, tapped into an understanding of mental models. At least in their industry, they're going to be very open to these ideas of understanding where a person fits in a mental model.
Yeah. So because of that one-to-one component, working with people directly, and because of the more reserved nature of the harmonizing ESFJ, often it's going to be challenging for this subtype to push itself out there. It's not going to necessarily be natural for this style of ESFJ to go and market themselves, let's say, or toot their own horn. So often it can be helpful to have an advocate or a champion, a friend, family member, partner, spouse, somebody that understands your value as a harmonizing ESFJ. They can say, no, I vouch for this person. They know their stuff. They can actually be very helpful to you. They're not good at marketing themselves. Yeah, whatever. But I mean, they can show up, they can deliver, they can be an amazing asset, amazing, support to you, help to you, whatever. So I think, we talked about the creative looking for a platform to connect to. Well, I think that the harmonizing needs a person to connect to or persons to connect to that can help, again, put them on, promote them, put them forward, recommend them. So their network, I think your network of people is going to be very important for opportunities in your career life for you if you identify as a harmonizing ESFJ.
Yeah, and harmonizing ESFJs, unlike, say, creatives, when we talked about building out all of those, cul-de-sacs of people, the harmonizing ESFJ is going to have a much smaller, tighter group of friends. And those relationships are going to be really important to them. They like a more chill vibe. They like a more comfortable environment. They like something that's more even-keeled with enough novelty, because they are tapped into that intuitive aspect. They need enough novelty to keep things interesting. And they need those people, that small group of people that are important to them, to understand that they are quirky, that they're a bit of an odd duck.
Let's talk about some of the career clusters this subtype might find itself in. You, as an ESFJ, might find yourself in.
Right.
What are some of the careers?
So these will be careers that are interesting and attractive to harmonizing ESFJs, but they're also the kinds of careers that might help an ESFJ tap into harmonizing traits, right? So help them wire themselves more that direction. Again, not comprehensive list, but we've got mental health counselor, business consultant, diplomat or foreign service officer, executive coach, project manager, clinical psychologist, social researcher, humanitarian aid worker, mediator or conflict resolution specialist, speech language pathologist, occupational therapist, hospice or palliative care specialist, cultural diversity consultant, special education teacher, and customer relationship manager.
I'm noticing that many of those example careers are about communication, but not necessarily verbal communication. Some are economic, some are energetic, some are empathic, some are emotional. Like there's a bunch of communication roles there, helping people bridge and come together and connect with each other. And the economy is different, right? It's not just about money or something or connection, like transacting that way. It's transacting through all of these different economies, which is interesting. So I think this is the sage, the wise, not old ESFJ, but the old metaphorically, the wise old person that has a lot of wisdom to dispense. Again, a little slower pace. The rhythm or the pacing is maybe a little bit at a lower cadence, but that allows them to tap into more of that intuition, more into the empathy, more into the deeper elements of the human experience that they are going to help other people with.
And in some ways, it's probably better if that style comes a little later in life, because if you're not tapped into society's expectations with somebody with ESFJ preferences, it's better if you were at one time and you've overcome it, as opposed to just never being tapped into it. And so if you did start out as a harmonizing ESFJ, which some circumstances do very much influence that wiring under the age of 25 that has nothing to do with career or occupation, if that's the case, you might want to venture out into some of the other subtypes and gain some of that social expectation awareness, really tap into that piece, particularly with normalizing ESFJ preferences.
Yeah.
But it's still not a bad place to be, right? Who cares if you're an odd duck? I don't care. I have ENTP preferences. Doesn't bother me at all. But this is an ESFJ that might have trouble really identifying themselves in that, that space, because that's not usually how we see people with ESFJ preferences.
Yeah. The neurotransmitter chemical is estrogen, or the hormone estrogen that influences
Let's
neurotransmitter.
just call it neurotransmitter from this point on to make life easy.
Okay. Estrogen is what the harmonizing is chasing, that chemical. And let's talk a little about the function. So again, the dominant driver function for an ESFJ is extroverted feeling or harmony. The co-pilot auxiliary function, the perceiving learning function, is introverted sensing or memory. There's the analytical or holistic bend. Which way are these both functions focused?
So it is the opposite of the dominant. So if the dominant, both of those functions are analytic, focused, assertive, then for the harmonizing, they're both holistic. They're both more receptive, diffused, a little bit, more open spaced. And that's one of the reasons why, as you mentioned, they can really use people to champion them and kind of push them forward, because they have a tendency to be a little bit more relaxed.
Yeah. So partnerships will be very key for this subtype.